Good morning, everybody. I'm about to give my comment, or an expanded commentary on Lecture 12 of the Foundations of Esotericism. There are a number of interesting themes that arise within this lecture, especially a more detailed understanding of the rounds and the different periods of time in which the evolution of consciousness and the evolution of the human being takes place. So it will probably be my first commentary. I've called this lecture, my own title to it, The Fourfold Human Being, or the Fourfold Physical Body. So partly as a background or an expanded understanding of this lecture, we can come to understand that Rudolf Steiner has, or what I'm seeing is that Rudolf Steiner was developing an incredible understanding of evolution, trying to bridge the spiritual understanding with the physical understanding. We could say that the understandings of Darwin and Haeckel compared to that of an esoteric understanding of how consciousness plays into the changing evolution of species. And so the language used in these lectures is very difficult, because if you are a student of anthroposophy, you probably know other words for these things, but the theme that runs through these lectures in the dynamics that play into evolution are consciousness, life, and form. And in the largest spectrum of things, we are going through 7 stages of consciousness, as we've heard in previous lectures, from a trance-like consciousness to a deep sleep, to a dreaming consciousness, and now a waking consciousness. And in any state of consciousness, we can normally touch into 3 previous states of consciousness and kind of dream into or get an inkling of 3 future forms of consciousness which are spoken about. And in each of these large rounds of development of a state of consciousness, another aspect of the human constitution is formed. And in this lecture, Rudolf Steiner again gives us pictures around how the oldest formation of the human being is that of the physical form. Again, please remember that material body is only one level of substantiality. We have life substantiality, we have soul substances, and we have spiritual substances going right up to what we've called the akasha. So even though the physical form was built out of the consciousness of higher beings 3 bodies ago, and again, another reminder that even modern day astronomy has found in the study of the heavy metals of the sun, discovered that there have been 3 previous suns before our sun. So in the 3rd one before our sun, the physical formation of the human being is done, but it wasn't yet in a physical material form. And then in the 2nd level, the life body, or what Rudolf Steiner calls the etheric body, is added. And then in the 3rd great level of consciousness, what he calls the soul body or the astral body, is added. And now, in this particular 4th state of consciousness, with 3 further states of consciousness to be unfolded, we are adding what is called the self, or the ego, depending on which language you're using, but that which the eternal individual spirit in these other 3 sheaths is added and is being developed. And then we are asked to see how we have within our human being, a fourfold human being, that our self has a physical organ where we perceive ourself, which is focused primarily upon the brain and the spinal cord. The sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system are an adjunct to that, but the I, the self, is experienced or finds its foothold in the material world through the spinal cord and the brain. Whereas the astral body or the soul body is to be found in the heart and the warm blood system of the human being. Our soul finds its expression, or its a capacity to express itself through us into the material world, by having the blood system as its place. Our life body finds itself in the solar plexus, and here we see the complementary to the spinal cord And the brain, the solar plexus, is kind of the other brain, another brain within the human being of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. But that is the seat, so to say, where our life body manages to keep ourselves together as a unit and can find a window, a place of expression for the self in the world. And then the physical body, of course, is through the skeleton and the muscles and the actual physical body. So we see that our fourfold nature, at present we're developing the fourth level of our fourfold nature. The individualized eternal self is becoming to a further step of consciousness through these four sheaths. And then we look further in the lecture, and he starts talking about how within this consciousness there is another light that is similar to the light, the sunlight out for the physical earth, but within the human experience there is a light within the human being that can come to expression, which is known as the Kundalini light. Again, we're talking about Eastern esoteric words, and Steiner is seeking for the Western esoteric complement to that. But within the human being, as we enlighten ourselves, as we become more and more aware of things, this spiritual light that enlightens in us is known as the awakening of the Kundalini light. And in the West, we need to undergo instruction, and we use our intellect and our concepts to awaken this Kundalini light. I'll come back to say more about how that works in a post-Kali Yuga age that we live in. And then we see in this lecture, so I'm just going through the lecture, that we have to develop as our self starts to work upon these lower sheaths, the astral sheath or the soul and the life body within us and the physical body. They start to become transformed. Eventually we transform the desires of our astral body into a more sort of conscious spirit body, and the thoughts that are carried in the etheric body, we start to develop a higher being within us, which in the East was known as Buddhi. So when we transform the astral body, we unfold the manas, and then the Buddhi, and then the Atman, when we start to eventually transform the physical body, we awaken the highest spirit being. And so we see that they are sort of two halves to reality, that which is our sort of physical substantiality, and through the work of the self upon the wisdom inherited, so to say, the mother substance of our humanity, we awaken our higher spiritual self. And this is then the process of the Kundalini light transforming itself. But I will make more comment on that in a moment. And then we talk about the occult pupil. I'm just getting to the end of this, that we start to overcome the duality between the physical plane and the spiritual plane as we do this. And then for some people who've sort of made comments on my Facebook page, what happens after we die, and especially what happens if a person takes their own life, or if they have a sudden death by violence, say on a battlefield or through a bomb or some kind of accident that they have. We find that these people in the spiritual world have very painful experiences, because they connection to the vehicle through which we can transform ourselves is severed very quickly, and we haven't had time to let go of the connection to the vehicle, to the temple of our spirit, by which we can find our higher development. We find that the people who don't have a lot of time to prepare and slowly release themselves from our attachments to that temple find it very difficult in their post-death experience. That's the beginning of a comment on that. But I would also just like to make a comment. We will continue as we go through these lectures, start to unpack these 7 huge rounds or earth expressions, or there are going to be 7 expressions of our sun. At the moment we're in the 4th, and each of those sun developments have sub rhythms and epochs of time through which other aspects of nature are developed through the process of consciousness, life and form, and we will have to slowly unpack all the language around that. But the rhythm of 7, like the 7 days of the week, is a very central understanding in Rudolf Steiner and in esoteric understanding of the process of development. Taking something from a seed soul gesture to its maturity requires 7 steps. and we will see that there are many sub-rhythms. So if we have the 7 sun incarnations, they are obviously huge amounts of times in the concept of the spiritual evolution of consciousness, but within that there are sub-themes of 7 and sub-themes of 7 and sub-themes of 7, 3 or 4 layers into ever closer ones. The smallest one we've already spoken about, which is a cultural epoch of what we see as an astrological age of 2,160 years, the process of the sun passing in its March equinox through the particular age of a sun sign or a constellation takes about 2,160 years. 12 of those gives a Platonic year, but each of those is a particular time where a task in our humanity is. So we could be asking ourselves, what is the current task? When did this particular time start? Of course, there are different places where we can find a starting point, but we could ask ourselves, what particular cultural evolutionary period are we in? What is the task of the human self in the temple of these 3 sheaths that we have to unfold through the activity of the conscious self? So that's the one level. The other level that I'd like to talk about is that as Steiner develops his own understanding of the work in a post-Kali Yuga age, the Kali Yuga age started about 5,100, well now 5,200 years ago, about 3,100 before the Common Era, and it's about a 5,000 year period. In fact, to be precise, it's 5,100 years. So at the beginning of the 20th century, the Kali Yuga started to end. And there's many transitions that we've seen that. We had the Mayan count, all these different cultures showing us that a particular level of consciousness has come to an end. And then ascension language, we start to see that a new consciousness has come about. And to live in this age, we have to develop a new understanding of many of these old principles. And so the awakening of the Kundalini in Steiner's and Western esoteric point of view is slightly different to say in a different age. So we can use the practice where we use the breath and positions and meditations to awaken the Kundalini fire from where it's held in our chakra, at the base chakra, and it can rise through the body. But as Steiner then develops these ideas, along with other people like Sri Aurobindo and other great teachers, he starts to see that we actually need the Sophianic gesture towards the awakening of the chakras and the Kundalini fire. So his comment in later works, in fact, a book that comes out so shortly after these lectures in 1905, is to say that as the current state of the human body is, that our chakras have only been half developed through the Kundalini. So, for example, we have the 16-petaled lotus flower in our throat, or the 12-petaled lotus flower in our heart, that at this point only half of them have been developed by the esoteric work of various cultures. So there's only 8 petals that are unfolded in, say, the throat chakra. And some of the great teachers have then given us the exercises or the spiritual disciplines to develop the other 8. One of the disciplines that comes to mind is the teaching of the Buddha, who gives us the Eightfold Path as practices by which we then unfold the other half of the lotus. And as that unfolds, it'll begin to spin in one direction, and the ancient prepared half of the chakra will then also unfold. And if we do spiritual exercises through which we precipitate the pushing up of the Kundalini from beneath, it'll only spin half of it. To do this out of a Sophianic gesture, or that of a wisdom woman, we have to allow other disciplines in our conscious mind to enter from above. In the Kabbalistic sense, or the Gnostic sense, this is known as the Ein Sof, the light of Sophia. And so we need to develop the Ein Sof, which kind of develops the other half, like a yin-yang half of the chakras. So we need to do the Sophianic work of developing 6 exercises around certain heart gestures, 8 exercises around the 16-petal lotus flower. And as we work downwards from the light of the spirit down, even the Christian picture of the light or the flame descending upon the head and descending into the human being through the chakras is an image of this Sophianic gesture of Christianity and the Sophianic gesture of the work required since the end of Kali Yuga. That we allow the chakras to develop the other half of the chakras, and as they then spin, the Kundalini light can come up from beneath and meet the other snake. If we look at the world energy systems, we can also see that the rainbow serpent is met by the plumed serpent. So the plumed serpent of the ancient Aztec people, or the Mayans in Lake Titicaca, and the rainbow serpent, the female rainbow serpent from Australia, they have to travel around the world and fructify in their crossings. These are known as the ley lines, where the ley lines cross over each other and energy center is built. And Steiner is very clean that we develop the understanding that the one form of light entering us, this Ein Sof, is the conscious work that we need to bring towards the already established Kundalini light within us. So the light enlightenment of Kundalini can happen in old ways, where we have Kundalini experiences of the wisdom light arising within us. But at this point, if we don't balance that with the Ein Sof or the Sophianic work of inner soul work, we will only get half the perceptive organ. This is something that is possibly not that popular to know, and many spiritual traditions may not be quite as disciplined about bringing this knowledge to us. But Steiner is quite clear that we must develop. It's better for us to spend time developing the other half of the chakra, so that when the spiritual organ of perception opens, we have the full 16 petals, so we can start to have the perception organ that is already available to us in our soul, plus the spiritual organ that complements the physical senses. So Steiner develops out of this idea of the Kundalini spiritual light within the human being, the concept of the spiritual senses. So we have the physical senses that are direct, that allow us through the physical body to interact and create in the physical world, but we also have to develop the spiritual senses to complement them. And it's the work of bringing the Ein Sof in through spiritual development, almost like a light yoga. In fact, he calls it that. So we can have breath yoga for the Kundalini and light yoga to practice the balancing or the complementary energy to the Kundalini chakra energy. We have the Sophianic side to that. So I thought that might be something quite interesting to add to what's going on with these works. That when we start to talk about the development of the chakras or the opening up of the spiritual sense organs, that we actually have to bring into its fullness the physical senses and the spiritual senses, the Sophianic gesture to the Kundalini gesture. That's not so apparent in this lecture. I thought that could be a bit of an expanded commentary to the bringing in of that. So yes, as we go now towards the center of this book, we will make more and more comment about the details of the 7 stages of development in each phase. But if we want a quick word, we are, so to say, at the middle point of the middle point in our age. We are at the sort of most materially dominant part of evolution, and therefore our gesture in our evolutionary process is to develop our understanding and our capacity towards the soul and the spiritual worlds again, out of being isolated and individuated in the physical world. We're at the most material, substantial part of evolution. But we'll bring the numbers and the understanding of that in future commentaries. Okay, wishing you all a good weekend, and I will put lecture 13 on when we get to lecture 16. We'll only be halfway through this, so yeah, hopefully isolation lasts a little bit longer, that we can get through the whole series. Okay, have a good day. Cheers.